In 2018, the United Nations sent senior human rights special reporter Philip Alston to investigate rising poverty and widening inequality in the world's most wealthy nation. But Mr. Alston wasn't just sent anywhere to examine how growing poverty and inequality were affecting the daily lives of regular Americans. No, he was sent specifically to the southern state of Alabama, where he found nice homes, good infrastructure, and general decency, but that was in affluent neighborhoods. While he found other, more populous areas in deep disrepair, finding multiple earmarks of third world living conditions in Lowndes County, Alabama. But you already know the South is poor. That isn't a revelation. It's consistently been America's most fiscally diminished region for generations. That can be seen here from this map of U.S. wealth in 1872, where the areas of shaded orange show America's wealth in the north. Or here on this map of the nation's lowest income rates in 1949, where yellow represents low and the red represents seriously low incomes spanning all over the South. And it can also be seen here from this map of recent poverty, where red shades signify poverty, and there's no place darker red than the South. In fact, to find a time where the South wasn't drowning in poverty, you'd have to go back beyond the Civil War era, when the US was a completely different place and the South was famous for a unique blend of charm and hospitality, standing in this strange center of an agricultural revolution and deeply disturbing inhumanity. But that era of the southern United States hasn't existed in nearly 2 centuries, and by just the late 1800s, the South had come to symbolize rural poverty much in the way it does today. Here are the 25 highest income counties in the United States. Of course, all the usual suspects included. Loudoun County, Virginia, with a median income of $147,000. Santa Clara County, California, with a median income of $130,000. Nassau County, New York, with a median income of $127,000. Mostly revolving around Washington, D.C., the Silicon Valley, and the Northeast Corridor. In fact, only one of these counties is located in the South, the most affluent portion of Atlanta, arguably the only major metropolitan in all of the southern United States. Well, wait, I should probably break down exactly what the South is before outlining its major cities or explaining why the South has underperformed the rest of America in output, equality, education, and standard of living. Because the contention around what states are and aren't included in the southern US can be fascinating itself. As you can see here when browsing through the various southern borders outlines and inclusion lists from several researchers, publications, and opinion polls. The census, for instance, defines the South as everything from Texas over to Florida and all the way past Washington, D.C., while the majority of sources seem to focus on what's often referred to as the Deep South. The Deep South, or the Lower South, is technically a sub-region of the census-defined South, with several public polls showing that Americans consistently consider the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, and Georgia to be the South, due to their shared culture, history, geography, and economics. Though perhaps if meaningful portions of states were considered, I think you would also need to add, and please let me know if I'm off base here, but I'd say eastern Texas, northern Florida, certainly southern Tennessee, and arguably even the southern tip of North Carolina up to about Charlotte. But even if the South, these 5 states, and let's go ahead and say these portions of Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and North Carolina were to be considered in that list of, say, the nation's top 100 earning counties, only 3 of them would make the list. Just the wealthiest sections of Atlanta, Houston, and Dallas. Where if this metric were weighted fairly, it would need to include at least 5 times as many high-earning counties. That's to say, the southern United States is known mostly for its small to medium-sized cities, loosely connected through poor, sprawling rural communities. With few real cities like Atlanta, or Houston, and Dallas. That's why the economy there runs mostly on agriculture, manufacturing, resource extraction, and the service industry, lacking the modernity of other U.S. regions. Though I should add that geography itself is complicated, and the difficult reality of life in the American South is changing, with these pockets of the southern United States growing both in population and prosperity, pushing discourse in a new direction, something I'll discuss further later in this video. But the growing differences across this historically homogeneous region are more the exception than the rule. While southern poverty remains commonplace, deeply rooted and widespread despite the population there being sizable, the topography being accessible, and the lands being fertile, as vast resources there have often felt more like a curse than a net positive. While recent gains in lost manufacturing haven't kept pace with the economic comebacks happening in other US regions that have better pivoted to this new reality, despite being harder hit by decades of offshoring and automation, as Rust Belt cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh have invested heavily in revitalizing their city cores while promoting startup endeavors and attracting operations from legacy technology companies. At a time where residents in Jackson, Mississippi are facing perhaps the worst drinking water crisis in modern American history. And I think that's ultimately the point here. The South isn't just objectively poor, it has high childhood poverty and rising food insecurity. Its everyday residents struggle through some of America's worst healthcare, education, worker rights, and pollution. And its infrastructure and social institutions are deeply underfunded. And while it's arguable whether those factors are the result of poverty or whether poverty has resulted in those factors, the cycle of cause and effect are less important than who is and isn't benefiting from it. And in the South, large corporations and corruption have reigned supreme, while working families have struggled through poor pay and benefits and limited safety and environmental standards. And I get it, looking at regional decline can often feel like an episode of Scooby-Doo, as if it's always the bad multinational corporation misusing its unthinkable wealth and influence, hiding under the mask. When obviously it's a lot more complicated than that. Especially when so many Southern residents are happy with how things are, with rural living, little oversight, and a lower cost of living. But many of them would also appreciate better workplaces, higher pay, and higher quality education and healthcare. Again, changes that are happening, but mostly within just these pockets. With parts of the South declining, even as the region grows, but mostly only around the edges and outside of its central core. Eastern Texas, southern Tennessee, southwestern North Carolina, northwestern South Carolina, northern and southern Alabama, and the vast majority of the Florida Panhandle are experiencing a boom period in population, output, amenities, and services, with Charlotte becoming a rival to Atlanta, and with Atlanta becoming a modern megacity, while places like Huntsville and Greensville are experiencing some of the nation's fastest growth. But that's only happening in pockets, when the southern cities, suburbs, and rural enclaves that need progress the most seem to be left out of the party entirely, at least for now.